Fantastic. Well, thank you guys for coming on, and thanks for Tim Tim for hosting, and also Barbara Wamsley. Is she on? She's the one that had the great idea and introduced and made this thing get started here. So thank you for her as well. Is she there somewhere? What?
Is your name Tamara?
Anyway, so we have an august group here from all over the country. When we started this, I thought it was just going to be in little old Charlottesville here with our neighbors. But Tim, you sent it around to a wide email list, and so as a result, we have people from all over the country, which is really cool. I delivered to some neighbors, but we also shipped wine all over the country, which we love to. Except for Utah, it's a felony there. So hope you didn't even bother to invite anybody from Utah, because they really couldn't share with us. But every state does it differently, but we can ship to most states, and glad to do that. But almost all of what we do is right at our tasting room in Madison County, just north of Charlottesville. And we'll tell you a little bit about that along the way, as well as the wine. I see we have a number of esteemed wine club members on as well. And Betty Martin, you get extra points for wearing the DuCard jersey there. Fantastic. So we'll drop off appropriate prizes at your house afterwards for that. So that's a lot of fun. The wine club really is just code for heavy drinkers of DuCard wine. There's some younger alums on here, but there's also a number of older alums, including back to 1974, if you can believe it. Do you believe that, Karen?
Here's a shout out to the class of 74.
So my wife is one of them, and so she's right here and will kick me in the ribs if I make any mistakes along the way or whatever. As they say, if you enjoyed the session, you can let me know that, and if you have any criticisms of it, you can direct them to her. So let's see what else. I also see among the other distinguished guests, we have both my dentist and my grandson's doctor. So it just shows that even in the medical profession, they can self-prescribe DuCard wine to get them through the pandemic. And we're glad for that, purely for medical purposes, right, Jack? Let's see what else. So the mechanics of the session is start opening bottles here. We're going to start with the Viognier, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we'll move to the Merlot, and then we'll move to the Citro dessert wine afterwards. But importantly, I've found that these sessions are great if they have a lot of Q&A. So as Tim mentioned, raise your hand. He's in control there, and we'll unmute you for your question, or you can type anything into the chat box there. That helps me as I scan it while I'm talking about something, and in pretty much real time, I can address questions or other comments or whatever that you have. So that's a lot of fun. The last thing I think is you've got a Zoom bingo card here. And I've discovered after doing a bunch of Zoom calls and watching presidential debates and all kinds of other things that it's a lot of fun to have some other sort of distraction here. So Tim, we've arranged right that the winner of the bingo gets free tuition for their kid. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Okay, fine. So no problem there. So and you'll see a few special squares, including one where I don't know if anybody will qualify, but in the bottom left-hand corner that says, if your William and Mary roommates are all on the call, you get that square. Anybody qualify there?
I got two of my roommates right there.
There's Lori Keenan and Mary Horn. So funny how that works. So that's great. I do want to start though with the important center square. And if anybody would like to volunteer what the answer is to the, no, I'm going to do it, to the Lou Holtz quote there, because one of my favorite sports quotes of all time. And you probably all know this, but as a non-William and Mary person, I get a lot of grins out of it. When he was the coach of William and Mary, and he had a little bit of a losing streak, they asked him what the problem was. Of course, he was very successful later. But he said, well, our problem here at William and Mary primarily is that we have too many, on the football team, we have too many Marys and not enough Williams. Probably after a loss to Dartmouth or something like that. So So anyway, so you all get that square. So why don't we turn our attention to the Viognier, which is the first wine that we have. Vicky and I were roommates all 4 years, says Bonnie. Where's Bonnie? You had roommates all 4 years that were on with you here? That's pretty cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different wines, 3 different grapes really. And the first one being Viognier. And that's a grape that is fairly unique to Virginia. It's a French grape, but it's kind of fallen out of favor in France. And we sort of adopted it when we first started. And it has a wonderful match to Virginia countryside, I think, because its aromatics are peaches and honeysuckle and wildflowers. And, you know, if you live in the Central Virginia area, that's just all over the place. And so it really picks up those aromatics. Goes great with the seafood in particular. And so I like to just put a little bit in the glass and give it a good swirl and then put the nose in it. So there you go. Harwoods are doing that very well down there. And then put your nose in it and really try to pull it all in so you see if you can get sort of the aromatics of it. Now this is a 2019 vintage. What you see on the bottle for wine, sometimes confusing to people, is the date that's on the wine is the vintage year, the year the grapes were grown. And the reason that that's so important is that the weather is so different every year, in particular in Virginia, that we get great years and not so great years and so forth. And if we live it every day, so I can remember the weather pretty much for all the different years. But wine snobs sort of have memorized that, you know, 2000X was really good in Bordeaux, and therefore those wines will be really good, whereas 2000 and Y wasn't so good or whatever. And it has to do with how ripe the grapes get, how much sun they get, and how developed the flavors get in it. This was 2019 was really a very, very good year for us. 19 and 17 and 14 before it and 10. So in a decade of doing this, we've had 4 really good years, 2 or 3 average years, and 2 absolutely terrible years. And that's welcome to Virginia, welcome to farming. Last year, 2010, was one of the worst years we ever had. In fact, we didn't make any red wine at all because we couldn't get it ripe enough and developed enough. It worked out very well to put all that red into rosé, and we have a fabulous rosé, but we won't be bringing out any 2020 reds. And that's true with most of the wineries in Virginia. And you just have to roll with the punches, I guess. There's not really very much that you can do. But 2019 was a fairly dry year, lots of sun. We're about the only farming where you actually don't want any rain. Corn farmers, wheat farmers, everybody, they want rain. Tomato farmers, we don't. Rain just causes mold and mildew and fungus and so forth. So we want it to be hot and dry all year long. And the best years for us are ones where, if you're watching the 7 o'clock news, they're showing the drought all around the country and how it's terrible for all the Midwestern farmers. Those are years where we just sit quietly and really enjoy that we have a drought, because we're able to get super ripe grapes and really good wine as a result. So in the course of doing that, I might even have covered a couple of the little squares on our board here. But if not, I'll come back to it and I'll use them as a little bit of as a prompt, I guess. Questions from anybody on Viognier or on what we're doing? Somebody break the ice here. How do you do it, Tim? They touch something to raise their hand?
Yep, you can use the raise your hand feature. It looks like Mary might have a question here.
There it is. Okay. Hi, Mary. And you have to unmute.
Unmute, there we go. Okay, I started to write it, but so what foods do you particularly like with Viognier? What would be your favorite things?
Thank you. Crab cakes would probably be about number 1.
Oysters?
Oysters, if you like those, either raw or steamed. Also like it with salmon and with shrimp, actually. We do a seafood festival twice a year at our place. Some of you may have been there for it. And we get basically a seafood food truck that comes in with oysters and crab cakes. And we drink a lot of Viognier on that day. That's coming up actually next weekend. And then again in September. All of it's on our website if you're in town and interested in it. But I think what they say about, white with fish and red with meat is a pretty good indicator. Normally, there's no right or wrong, but in our extensive experience in drinking and in eating, we find that actually matches up pretty well normally. There's a great, I think it's a Far Side cartoon that says, it shows a couple of cavemen, and it says, what does that say? If the best pairing approach is that if the animal is running toward you to try to eat you, then it's red wine. But if it's swimming away or running away from you, then it's white wine. So keep that in mind. Other questions? There's a comment here about frost, and I want to talk about that a little bit, just so you can have some pity for me in growing the grapes and making the wine. It is April 8th right now, and it was 80 degrees. So everybody's absolutely psyched about how wonderful the spring is already in place, and we can start sitting out and relaxing and tanning and everything, right? Well, not to be humbug, but it's incredibly nervous for us because the grapes buds have not come out yet. And the warm weather kind of starts to stimulate them to come out, which is fine. But the problem is what happens if it goes back down, we lose this warm weather and we get a cold front later. And once those buds are out, if we get a frost, then it kills the buds, and the buds have the shoots that will have the grapes on them this year. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we are super nervous. I'm one of the few people around that really doesn't like that it's 80 degrees. I'd like it to be 50 degrees for about the next 3 weeks. And then once we get to a certain point, then I'd like to see the temperature go up and stay up. The issue for us is we don't want it to go up and then come back down. That's one of the problems that we had with 2020 is that we had a lot of frost. We have 3 different sites that we farm, and we farm almost all of our grapes. We don't buy much grapes from anybody. What you get from us is what we've grown. And I think that's the best sort of authentic way to it, not the way everybody does it. And maybe we'll talk about that later, but that's certainly the way we always do it. And 2 of our sites did fine, no frost at all. But the 3rd one got hit in a April frost and lost 100% on that site. Yeah. And so, you kind of shrug it off and you hope you get enough product, enough grapes from the other sites to kind of, keep you in business. What happens also, though, is the vine has what's called secondaries, which means after a frost, the vine will react and say, hey, wait a minute, all my buds got frozen off, and it will push out some what we call secondary buds. They're not very fruitful, but theoretically, at least we would get some grapes off of them. So that was kind of our saving grace until Mother's Day came mid-May, and we got another frost, and that killed all the secondaries on that site. So we absolutely had 0 off of that site. But the other 2 sites, which are only 5 to 10 miles apart from each other, had no effect at all. So it's kind of a relatively random thing. So 2020 will not be our we won't be sending Christmas cards to it. It's not our favorite year at all. This year, so far, we're fine. So hold the fort for us.
Your name.
Viognier, even spelled right in the question, is great. It's from France. It's from the Rhone Valley primarily, and it was very popular quite a while ago in France, but it declined, I guess. And one of the first decisions you make when you have a vineyard is what you're going to plant, because those are permanent plants that are going to be there, vines for maybe 50 years. So you got to get it right. If you plant the wrong ones, they don't do well, then you've got to take them out and start all over again and start the kind of grow-in clock of 3 to 5 years all over again. So I spent an awful lot of time researching and trying to figure out what to plant. And Viognier was one that came highly recommended for a variety of reasons. And so ultimately, after you do all the research, you just got to plunge in. And so we plunged in, and it's worked out very well for us. We've had gold medal wines for Viognier a couple of years in the state. And our Viognier a number of years ago was the Viognier that represented Virginia in a taste event versus France. And so we kind of had a pretty good honor of being in that contest and everything. So that's worked out pretty well. California, who could just stop us if they wanted to, they pretty much ignore it. A few people are starting to plant a little bit of Viognier out there, but pretty much we've got Viognier to ourselves, actually, as kind of a signature grape for Virginia. It's not aged in barrels. It's not oaky, buttery. The style that we have for our white wines is that we want it to be very what we call fruit forward. So you get all the sort of fruity elements of it, but not the oakiness and the butteriness that you'll find oftentimes, in particular with like a California Chardonnay. And that's just a stylistic difference and something that we prefer. Let's see, other questions about Viognier?
Hi, I have a question. My name's Denise. So I have tasted many Virginia wines, including many Viogniers, and my recollection is they tend to be on the sweet side. This, I think, is very well balanced. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. But is there a way I can tell by the label or some other way to know if it's going to be more or less sweet than I would prefer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Labels are basically worthless for that. Possibly on the back side of the label, which is where the producer can write some text describing whatever they want. They'll often have the characteristics of the wine for you to describe for you. But lots of wines, they don't take advantage of that back page at all. They just back of the bottle. They just put their logo and their production information and all that little bitty text for the government warning and so forth. There's nothing on the label that's going to tell you whether it's sweet or dry, unfortunately. Usually one way you can research it, I guess, if you really want to know ahead of time, is most of the descriptors that are on websites for wineries, they normally, among all the other flourish that they write about their wines, they'll usually indicate whether it's sweet or dry, or they'll have a statistic on it, which is the percent of residual sugar. And residual sugar is basically the sweetness. Anything close to 0 is a dry wine, and anything maybe 1 to 2 to 3% would be a medium sweet wine. Whew, got through that one.
Where'd you get the idea for the love sign?
Oh, where did we get the idea for the love sign? That means somebody looked at the pictures or looked at our video or whatever. So Virginia is for lovers. That's the state motto, as you know. I think it's been that motto since even the class of 74 had it back then, even, I think. It might have been spelled differently back then. I don't know, but it's the longest running state promotional slogan in the country, and really the most effective, I think. And the Virginia tourism department does a really fantastic job of stitching that all together about all the beautiful things that that Virginia has to offer. And so it started that a couple of wineries put together a love sign, and some other venues did, and then it just spread from there. And so we wanted to have one too, basically. And ours, we have a bunch of cobalt blue bottles that were left over from a very early bottling, and they really look beautiful. And I just couldn't get myself to throw them away. I had cases of them just stacked outside, and they were in the rain, and the cardboard was getting wet and all that stuff. And then inspiration hit, a great moment of inspiration. And I said, let's use those to create a love sign. And I found a local sculptor who I hadn't heard of, but it turns out he's a nationally known guy and lives in Madison County. And Thomas Fernandez, thank you. And I gave him a little kind of crummy looking non-artistic sketch of what I was after, and he politely looked at it and said, how about would you mind if I kind of reworked it a little bit and got back to you? Sure. And that's what he came up with afterwards. And I personally think I'm not very biased or anything, but I think it's about the best love sign in the state, actually. All the grapevine leaves on it, you can't really see it, but the leaves are hand pounded in his forge and everything. And it has grape trunks and tendrils that hold the bottles in and everything. So it's a lot of fun, and that's what you see right when you come into the tasting room. You drive at our place, you come in through the right next to the rows of grapevines, you pull into a little parking lot, and then you see the love sign, and you walk across a little bridge over the stream that is through the middle of our property and into our tasting room. And then from the tasting room, you look out the back window on the Shenandoah National Park, which is what we border. So you think I'm making all this up, but it's actually true, all these things. So it's just a fantastic place to live and to operate our DuCard, right, Betty? Madison County is pretty fun. Let's see.
Are you open for
Are
tasting?
you open for tastings, and do you need a reservation? Thank you, outdoor seating. So COVID's really been something here, and too bad for all of our restaurant friends, who many of whom didn't survive, of course. But it turns out that coincidentally, that wineries are out in rural areas with a lot of open space. And so we were closed for a while at the beginning of COVID, and then we were allowed to open up, and I did that slowly. We did a lot of stuff to prepare our procedures right and everything. But once we opened back up, this became a kind of psychological, winological getaway for people who just had to get out. And we did just fine last year. We almost like a public service as a place for people to go. And we didn't do tastings. We're still not doing tastings. The traditional approach, if you don't know, for Virginia wineries and maybe wineries just about every place, is the standard old approach was you'd come up and sort of belly up to the bar and elbow your way in next to other people, and servers behind would be pouring for you and 2 or 3 other people, and pretty loud, and everybody's trying to get their glasses refilled and that kind of stuff. And we certainly couldn't do that in COVID. I never really liked that approach to doing wine tasting, but it was sort of the traditional way. But now what we do is you come into the tasting room and you order what you want. It's either a bottle to sit out to get delivered to you out on the patio, or we're doing what we call flights, which is 4 wines, a modest amount in crystal glassware, and then we serve it at your table. So it's very private, very personal, and much more elegant that way. So everybody comes out and they get a flight of reds or flight of whites, or a couple will get 1 and 1 and taste them back and forth and so forth at a table spread out from probably 20 or 30 feet from the next table, or overlooking the stream or whatever. So it's a really nice respite, I think, from the real world to be out there. And so all outdoors. There's a tent under a patio, but that's got ventilation, and it's pretty windy out there most of the time with the wind coming off the mountains. So we think it's about as safe as we understand it that it can be. And we're still pretty tight with our procedures. We are making it reservations recommended now. It has become so popular on Saturday afternoons that we can get to capacity basically potentially by late afternoon. But recommended. We just don't want people to drive an hour and a half from DC or something and get there and find out that there's a sign on the front saying, sorry, sold out, you got to turn around. So reservation helps you from that standpoint. But if you're just kicking around midweek or something, you might be the only one there. Who knows? You certainly can pull in, and we'll take care of you. Sounds beautiful and very safe, and I'll visit. Okay, how about if we go on to a Merlot? Which we happen to have right here.
I'm not ready.
Okay.
But I'm moving.
Well, that didn't take long. So Merlot is famous or infamous. Anybody know what made it so infamous? The movie? Somebody?
Yep.
Sideways, there you go. Yeah. So That's where the guy says, don't pour me any stinking Merlot. I don't want any Merlot. I want something else. Yeah, if she orders Merlot, I'm out. Something like that with a little bit more colorful language is what they said in the movie. It turns out that Merlot sales nationwide went down by like 20% as a result of that movie. And I calculated it sometime, and I think they had something like 3 million gallons of excess production of Merlot that they couldn't sell because it was somebody drank it, I guess, eventually, but makes a big difference. They better not have a movie about Viognier. That's all I can tell you. So Merlot. This is widely planted, known all over the world. Very, very widely made in California, in lots of restaurants, lots of grocery stores. And most of the Merlot that you'll ever taste is worthless. And the reason why is that they can grow it really prolifically and grow lots and lots of tonnage, get huge harvests on it. And when they do that, they get a lot of volume, but very little character, very little taste. So we are just the opposite. We grow small amounts and we drop a lot of the fruit on the ground. We sacrifice up to half of the fruit that's on the vine so that what remains gets all the energy and all the attention of the vine so that it gets absolutely super ripe. So same thing, a little bit of swirl, little sip, little gargle. And it has a very nice sort of cherry strawberry is what I get, actually. Very fruity and nice intensity, lots of good color. And so this is what you would call a varietally correct Merlot, not politically correct, varietally correct, which means it tastes like Merlot is supposed to. If you open the book about Merlot, it'll describe it, and it'll be describing this and not the $10 grocery store Merlot that's way overcropped and mechanically operated and everything else. So not that I feel strongly about it, but for us, this is a 2017, yeah, which was the previous really great year, a 2017 in a red, given how we age it, etc. Would be released in 2019. In our case, we released it in 2020 with a little bit of extra aging. And just for sort of benchmarking purposes, for us, a typical release of a vintage wine like this will be 100 or 200 or maybe 300 cases. That's it worldwide for the year. We have a couple of acres of Merlot, and that's all we get. What you'll see in a grocery store, good brand names, but names you've heard of and everything, they will do probably 500,000 to 1 million cases under that label each for Merlot. Central Valley, California, just absolutely tonned out. So we have about a 2-minute supply compared to them. So it's a different product, and they're not too worried about us because we're just a gnat on the back of the elephant, really. So, but we like it. And food-wise, pairing-wise, what do you think, Karen?
Pasta with red sauce.
Oh yeah, pasta with red sauce. Yeah, the acidity in a red sauce of pasta is really good with it. Yeah, really brings out all the flavors that way. So let's see. So a couple of questions.
Asked if it was a blending.
Was Merlot a blending wine for Cab? Well, there are 5 key grapes in Bordeaux. We think of Merlot and Cab, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. We think of those as the 5 what they call noble grapes of Bordeaux that they use always for blends, basically in France. If you go to a chateau in France, they pretty much have just one wine for you to drink, and that's the one wine that's made from the grapes of that estate, blended smartly by the winemaker there. The idea that you have variety by variety, named varieties, is very much an American thing. That you have a Merlot, that you have a Cab, and so forth. So certainly when it started, all those grapes were blended together to become the Chateau's, signature signature wine. But for us, it's always been varietally separated. And I think that's true for most wineries in the US. We do make a couple of blends, and we use Merlot in a blend, including a very top end blend. We had something called a Triskel, like TRI, a 3-part harmony kind of thing, that we've only made 3 years, the 3 really good years that we've had since we opened. And that was a gold medal winner in the state. So in the state contest. Blends work really well in Virginia. It provides more complexity, I guess, because the different elements of the grapes and so forth. But a lot of purists also like the individual variety by variety. So you really get the components are really focused on the particular taste profile and so forth. And that's what we like to do with most of our Merlot. Do we recommend cellaring any of it? Well, the wine business is pretty funny here. You know, can you think of any other business where you want people to try your wines, like them, buy them, and then take them home and not drink them for years? Does that make any sense? But that's what people do. I wouldn't release the wine if it wasn't ready to drink right now. It'll get better for normally 3 to 5 years, but not forever. It's going to taper off after a while. Wine is a living thing and has all kinds of organisms in it. A lot of them we don't really even understand. And they'll cause the wine to turn. If you open a really old bottle that you were so psyched about, unfortunately you stored it in your kitchen above the cabinets, not so good. But if you open that 10 or 20 years later, you can find it's not any good. It's gotten oxidized, it's gotten brown in color, so forth. So you can age this wine for a few years, but it's good to drink right now. If we've released it, that's our mark of telling you that it's okay to drink it. So lots of good questions. So I think I'm just going to keep on going. How many? Can you all see the questions too, or just me? I'll read you all the questions anyway. So, how many bottles of wine do you distribute each year? Well, how many do we make each year? We do it in cases, case of 12, which is a nice unit. That's during COVID, that was what's known as a week's supply. Thank you for laughing, Karen. We do about 2,500 cases of wine a year is all per vintage. So 25 times 12, 25,000, 30,000 bottles of wine a year. 2,500 cases is really small. The average in Virginia wineries is probably 7 to 10,000, although they're probably half the wineries that are about our size. A small winery in California would be probably 250,000 cases to 500,000 cases, which is the entire production of the state of Virginia, by the way. So you're looking at a very different kind of style and size and scope and everything. We know every grapevine. Julian, our winemaker, vineyard manager, talks to each of them repeatedly in French during the year to make sure they behave. And that's completely different than a kind of a huge agribusiness winery that you'll find out west. So we're tasting each wine with 4 different cheeses. It's tasting really nice with white Stilton with cranberries. Well, send some over. That sounds good to me. And you can see the chat, so that's good. So I'm gathering that there are a couple of people from California that are on. Is it the Hardings that are on? Great. So I've always found that when in California, the most fun ones to visit are the smallest ones, a little bit more family oriented, more, super passionate about what they're doing. You can look them in the eye and see the depth of complete insanity of doing this, especially more so in Virginia, I think, because of the weather. We kind of pan California because they have such good, steady weather during the growing season. They don't have all the rains and stuff that we have, but or the frost, but they do have wildfires, and that's not so good. There's a condition of the grapes, and they're going to have to deal with it this year, last year in particular, called smoke taint. which means the smokiness of all those wildfires. You know how acrid that smoke is if you ever even driven past a wildfire. That will get absorbed into the grapes and is almost impossible to get out. And they're working on all kinds of mechanisms to try to separate it or centrifuge it or something or other to try to get it out of there, because otherwise they'll lose an awful lot of wine and have it be basically undrinkable. So Tricia Lee recommends Sonoma County over Napa, and I agree with that too. It's interesting. People say, well, yeah, well, Virginia, okay, it's going to be, is it going to become the next Napa? Because it's very fast growing. But remember that all of our wineries together are, less than a single large winery in California. So, and I tell them, no, it's not going to be the next Napa. And I hope not, because that's almost like kind of too densely developed. It's like a winery after winery, like a supermarket after supermarket all in a row. I say maybe we become the next Sonoma though, because Sonoma is much more sort of farm oriented and the wineries are way spread out and a lot more like us, where to get to us or a lot of the other wineries, you have to drive through through a bunch of small country roads and you're off the grid and you're pretty sure that you're lost, but then ultimately some grapevines appear in front of you and you turn in a little road and there you are. And I think that's a lot more fun. Type element. So I don't think we're going to become the next Sonoma, but if we became something, it would rather be Sonoma than Napa, actually. So why don't we get Glenn Harding to unmute? You can tell us about your small acreage in California.
Well, I actually live in a continuing care retirement community, and we've got, I think it's 1 or 2 acres, but we as residents have, I don't know, 125 vines or so that we get to pick and crush and bottle and take care of. It is so fun, really fun. So it's Primitivo, which is a Zinfandel clone, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And we just have a great time doing it. About, I don't know, maybe 50 of us kind of participate. There's 250 residents here, but it's just a great fun activity to do. The first year was 2018, and we picked too early and it wasn't so good. More European style, actually. The next year was more fruit forward, more like a Zinfandel that we know, we love it. And then last year with the fires, we just didn't harvest anything, and we're getting ready to start this year. We have bud break already, so.
Oh yeah, okay. So did the lack of having any wine cause a riot in your community there?
No, we're old people, we don't riot.
Okay.
We were very disappointed.
But it does sound like you've got senior living down right. This is
I think so.
This is a good thing.
Yeah, you can do things you never thought you could do, right?
Beautiful, right. Well, so now maybe I can.
65, by the way.
All right, so I think I might maybe wander on over to Westminster, Canterbury or something in town and suggest that maybe they'd all like to come out for a little grape picking sometime. Anything I can do to get free labor, I kind of like that idea, actually. Laura, you think you can get the people from Wintergreen to come up and do that? Yeah, okay, she's ready. Okay, so Tim suggested we keep this to about an hour. I'm happy to go for any amount of time, but let's make sure we get to the third wine also, because I want to describe it at least, and then we'll come back to the questions. And the third one is our Cetro, which is a port style wine. And yes, it's in that cute little bottle. I guess some of you didn't get the wine, so you haven't seen the bottles or the label. That's what our label looks like. That little scrolly on top, that's the mountains that are out the view of the back of the tasting room. And you see the name of this wine, Cetro, C''ESTTROP. And that has a story. There's a lot of stories about involved in DuCard. And this is a sweet, actually, dessert wine. It's a ruby port or port style wine. And it's made with Virginia's native grape, which is called Norton. And we ferment it. And then we ferment it down to a certain level and then stop the fermentation by adding a brandy spirits, which stops the fermentation while there's still, it's got enough alcohol in it, but it also has some residual sugar, as we talked about before. So it's about 8% residual sugar and about 18% alcohol. And then what we do is we age it in used whiskey barrels. There's a great story about all of this. So this wine is aged in used Maker's Mark and Woodford reserve barrels for a year or two before we bottle it. And we get these barrels from the distillery. And the distillery wants us to use the barrels because then after we've used them, we give them back to them. And then they do a port finished whiskey using our barrel, using the barrels that had our wine in it. So the barrels are used first by the distillery, then they come up to us. We put this wine in them to age them, and we take it out and bottle this wine. Then we give them back the barrels, and then they use the barrels again after that for when they put their whiskey in it. The inside of the barrel has basically all the wood is coated and impregnated with the DuCard wine, and so that kind of leaches out in a little bit into the whiskey, so it adds another element to the whiskey, and then they bottle it from there. So the fun thing is that this previous vintage of our Cetro got a gold medal in the state contest, and the Virginia Distilling port finished whiskey also got a gold medal as a top whiskey. So this is a double gold here. For those of you that live in Virginia, a Virginia Distilling Company is south of Charlottesville, about half an hour down in Lovingston. And so it's fun to work with those guys. There's a lot of cool craft stuff going on. Charlottesville and Central Virginia has become very much a food and drink, foodie kind of town. Lots of experimentation going on, lots of interesting things that don't always work, but this is one that actually has worked really quite well for us. So this is a nice after dinner sipping, nice with chocolate, anything chocolate, right? But then out at our place, I've been known to take a bottle outside in a hammock and relax under the stars, and before you know it, damn, the whole bottle is gone. But I only have to stagger 5 steps back inside. So good around a campfire. Probably would be pretty good with s'mores, whatever. So nice with a good cigar as well. Lots of good pairings. So.
Were you going to tell them the story of the name, Citra?
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you that, yes, I am. I'm going to tell you the story of the name. Okay, so if you look at these bottles, everything on the bottle is pretty much government regulated. The name, the vintage year, down at the bottom where it says Virginia red wine, that means that it actually has to be grapes from Virginia. That's important. If you see a bottle of wine and it says American underneath, whether it's in Virginia or California or Texas or any place, that means the grapes are not from the state that they are purporting it to be, and they're not allowed to label it that way. So it has to be a Virginia product. 75% at least is the minimum. Ours is always 100%, and most small wineries are 100%. So that's all a requirement. There's a little tiny thing down there, the bottom, which nobody can read, which is the amount of alcohol, percentage alcohol. It's probably good that you can't read that. And then on the back side, the bottom has this government warning label and so forth, and the marketing section above that I've described. Okay. So there is some guy in the government, you thought you had a bad job. This guy's job is to sit in a cube and review every wine label from every manufacturer in the country to make sure that it is consistent with all the regulations. The regulations include all the labeling and so forth. On the back, they read it all to make sure that it's not making false promises like that this wine will make you rich and famous and sexy, even though probably would, but not allowed to say that on this bottle. And they also review the name. So for example, in the US, you can't call it champagne because that's a treaty term. Champagne, the term is owned by the Champagne region of France. So in this country, we call it sparkling wine, certainly not as nice, but that's why it's called sparkling wine, even though everybody refers to it as champagne. For port, port is owned by Portugal, so you can't call it port. But we've had some fun, including on this one. So Cétrop, T-R-O-P, is port spelled backwards. And Cétrop in French means it's too much, like, whoa, this is too much. And in fact, it just so happens that T-R-O-P is port spelled backwards. So I sent that label in, and they're looking to see whether it says port on the label or not. And they didn't catch that it actually is port spelled backwards. So I got it approved, and here we are. So now we own that term, and we're the only ones that can use it. So there's a little clap up there in the left-hand corner. Appreciate you bearing with me for the entire story. So that's a nice wine. So this is kind of a broad selection of what we have at our place, and love sharing it with you. Let's see, what else do we have? How do we compare to New Zealand climate and vineyards? Well, New Zealand, I love New Zealand, the South Island in particular. It reminds me of Virginia to the extent that it's, very, very mountainous and hilly, and vineyards are all sort of tucked away and everything. They speak with a cooler accent than we do, though. Do you have a license still, or do you coordinate with a local distillery to fortify? Are you a federal agent asking me this? No. Okay, fine. Our license allows us to use brandy spirits to include in our wine, but we have to have a special license for everything that way. Let's see. Do we ever make ice wine? Yeah. Okay. Anybody know what ice wine is? Ice is a very sweet dessert wine, usually a white wine. You'll see that in France. You'll see it in New York State quite a bit. They do a lot of ice wine up there, and in Ontario. And the concept is that they leave the grapes on the vine until like February, and then they go out in 2 feet of snow and 20 below and harvest these grapes that by then are totally shriveled up, and most of them have been eaten by the birds, but they're incredibly concentrated. So they make a super sweet wine just naturally. We don't do that for 2 reasons. One, I have no interest in tromping around in February and harvesting grapes. When we get to October and we can harvest the grapes in good condition, then we want to harvest them and make wine and be done with it. But the second thing is that it doesn't necessarily get cold enough consistently here to do it. So you're usually going to have ice wine, true ice wine, in New York and Canada and other places like that. And we'll just leave it to them. So. How quickly do I need to finish the open bottle of Cétrop? Well, you got about 10 minutes left on this call. Should be able to do it by then. Cétrop will keep longer than other wines because it has more alcohol in it. It'll keep you healthier too, I suppose, as a result, right? Usually with a red or a white wine, it's probably better the second day after you've left it by mistake out on your counter, if you didn't finish it at dinner. But it's going to go bad in 2, 3, 5 days or whatever. This port, because of the level of alcohol in it, it'll stay good for weeks, probably months, probably. Although it's always best if you kind of vacuum seal the bottle, just to make sure you don't want fruit flies and other things getting in there. But the higher alcohol allows it to stay good for quite a while. Where can we find the whiskey aged in your barrels? You can find it at, the maker is Virginia Distilling, and they're actually in ABC stores in Virginia. And apparently they distribute pretty much nationwide, but it's Virginia Distilling Company, and it's called Port Finished Whiskey, I think. It's a beautiful bottle. If you find it, it's really interesting, very, very unique whiskey. Let's see. Yes, and the way that you get the air out of the bottle to store a bottle after it's partially been consumed is what somebody has mentioned is called vacuum. And you see that at what's the store that has all the home, Bed Bath and Beyond.
Oh,
Yeah.
everybody
Are
has
they
it.
still open? Anyway,
Grocery stores have it.
yeah, vacuum. So it basically is just a little little suction thing and a little plastic cork, and it sucks all the air out of the bottle, and we'll keep it for longer. Coravin is also another one where they basically have a very thin needle that they'll stick right through the cork. You don't even take the cork out of the bottle, and they'll stick that needle right through the cork in the top of the bottle and be able to, almost like taking blood, even better though, taking wine out of the bottle, and doesn't allow any air to get into the bottle. So that'll stay for a long time. Top restaurants do it that way. So, oh, yeah. So this is the VacuVin thing. This fits on top of the bottle, and then you basically pull on it and it'll suck the air out through the little top of this thing.
Handy like it.
Do we get a commission for selling VacuVins? I don't think so. Okay, so. So what I haven't covered, which might be fun for just a second, even though we're kind of going opposite direction, is how the hell did I get involved in this? Look like an otherwise fairly sane guy having a nice, relaxing retirement in Charlottesville. We bought a country house when we lived in DC. We bought one bordering the Shenandoah National Park, and it had a dead old apple orchard on it. Hadn't been farmed in 50 years probably, so it looked terrible. All the apple trees were falling over and everything. And so I was type A that I wasn't going to leave it like that. It didn't look good for our country house view. So I got the local experts to come out and look at it, the extension service, extension agents. And I'm a suburban kid from Chicago, so I had no idea what that was or who they were or why we had tech schools or anything. But they came out and they said, yeah, these apple trees, forget about it. I wouldn't replant. It's a bad market. But this would be a really good site for a vineyard. And Karen now says she had a knife on her, she would have cut the tongue right out of the guy at the time. But that intrigued me. I mean, how hard could it be, right? So a soon to be retired guy ought to have some grapevines out his country house view. And I was that stupid and that impulsive. And I said, that would be cool. And so we planted, and that was 20 years ago. And we grew the grapes in for about 10 years. Takes 4 or 5 years before you really get a harvest. We made every mistake along the way, a bunch of replants. It changed everything of what we do, how we manage the vineyard, how we prune, how we harvest, how we do everything. And then we sold the grapes off to other wineries, and that was fine. You know, I had grapes out in my country house view. But the other wineries, it turned out, I guess we ended up knowing what we were doing because we had really good grapes, because our grapes were a component of the award-winning wines like Best in the East and runner-up in Nationwide and all this stuff of other wineries. And so you'd think that would be cool, but it just annoyed me that our grapes would be in somebody else's product. So as soon as I heard that, I developed a little sketch for a winery and tasting room, and we built that and expanded into that. It took a couple of years to transition. And then just as of last fall, we had our 10th anniversary of having the winery open to the public. So yeah, so we had lots of parties last fall, COVID notwithstanding, because most wineries don't survive that long. It's too tough with nature, and the early pioneers in this are pretty much all gone. There's a few survivors, but it's the second generation and the generation after us that is going to be the ones who are able to thrive and maybe even make a dollar doing this, Karen. So it's a crazy, impulsive story, labor of love. Certainly adult onset continuous learning, and that's all been fun and very fulfilling for me. And I absolutely love sharing it with all of you. And you're all welcome to come and visit anytime. Look at the website. You'll get a feel for all the events that we do and the fun stuff we do. You'll even see some of the awards, some of the special things that we do. We're pretty heavy into the community and the environment and do a lot of nonprofit support, so forth. Don't have any cash money, but I've got a lot of wine as my currency. So I use that for different things, for various causes that I think are important. And we're even going to do a wine cruise this fall. We've done several of these before where we take our, Mary, Lori, Betty Martin's been with us on it before. And we pick a place. We're going to go to the Columbia River Basin in Washington and Oregon and go up the mighty Columbia. Actually has a lot of Lewis and Clark, Thomas Jefferson related contexts, and even some wine country out there. And so we're going to go on a small cruise ship. That way we're going to bring our DuCard wine and have our own special seminars and tastings on board and so forth. And so we originally had this plan for Maine for last year, and we had to scrub it because of COVID. And we came back in and found we couldn't even do the Maine cruise because the Canada is not going to let the ships into Canada to do the Maine and the coastline up there. So we had to kind of pivot, isn't that the word now,
Yeah.
pivoting, and book a cruise for the Northwest this fall. So email me if you have any wild hair interest in doing that. We have a few cabins remaining on it, but we just do a lot of fun, wacky stuff. We're just trying to have a good time and trying to grow some grapes and make some good wine and share it with all of you. So I hope this was fun. Thank you for coming. Let's see what other, oh, the DuCard name. Yeah, okay. Did anybody get the bingo? Who got the bingo?
No.
Nobody? So last time I did this program, the questions ended up being all about, people would ask, well, do you use French oak barrels? Because they wanted me to mention French oak barrels so they could check off the box on the bingo. So I was getting all these questions that ironically related to all the things that were on the bingo card, but it turns out they didn't win tuition after all. So unlike this one, where if anybody had qualified, you would have won tuition for your kid. So last story, I guess, the name DuCard. There's a single malt scotch called Cardu, C-A-R-D-H-U. It's very hard to find in this country. It's popular mostly in France and Spain and Portugal. And it's kind of eerily like us in that all the product comes off of their bog, just like we grow all the grapes for DuCard. And it turns out my great grandmother was the founder and operator of the Cardu distillery. And when you come to our tasting room, you'll see one of those old fashioned pictures of her, Elizabeth Cumming and John Cumming behind the bar. And so I guess I come by it honestly, I suppose, but I didn't want to call it, Scott's Winery. There are way too many of these wineries that are just a name of the founder. But I thought it would be fun to take Cardu and flip it around to be DuCard. And so that's how we came up with the name DuCard. Doesn't mean anything in French, doesn't mean anything dirty, it's just a name. But it's a way that we keep a little homage, isn't that the right term? To the family history. So, okay, everybody. Any other questions? Anybody want to be unmuted for anything? Raise your hand. Then we will adjourn. Thank you guys very much. Good to have you. Thank you very much. That was fun.